Let me pull my screen over here, pop it right up. And okay, so let's get into this guy here. We got the Air War College, Air University, Psychic Warfare, Exploring the Mind Frontier, Dolan N. McKelvey, Lieutenant Colonel, USAF, research report submitted to the faculty. You know what? You guys probably don't want to see me screaming. Man's greatest potential remains a prisoner of man. Vast, untapped mental capabilities create an entirely new battlefield dimension, which, if ignored, pose a threat to self and country more serious than nuclear weapons. This threat starts from within. Our fears and cynical attitudes toward psychic capabilities make us our own worst enemies. The Soviets, on the other hand, take psychic research very seriously at all levels, particularly for its military application. Exploring the mind frontier is essential, and the key to successful exploration is a greater psychic awareness. The mind is rich in unfathomed resources ripe for exploration, a limitless source of treasures for advancing all mankind, and a serious threat to those who ignore its potential. We must overcome our psychic inhibitions, stop denying the existence of paranormal events, and start trying instead to understand the nature of these phenomena. We must shed the super secret cloaks and educate our leaders at all levels on the real psi military potentials and threats so we can adequately focus and prioritize national resources. Only through greater openness and awareness to the truth can we adequately prepare. Sounds like they were onto something. They weren't very doubtful. Introduction. In December 1980, Lieutenant Colonel John B. Alexander, U.S. Army, authored an article in Military Review entitled "The New Mental Battlefield. Beam Me Up, Spock." In this article, he challenged the imagination of his readers when he stated, to be more specific, there are weapons systems that operate on the power of the mind and whose lethal capacity has already been demonstrated. There you have it, folks. This is not a new thing. I'm not blowing smoke for you folks. These weapons have been around for a while. He discussed psychotronic weaponry and provided eye-opening, unclassified information on both Soviet and American research into parapsychological phenomena. He concluded, the impact that psychotronic weaponry and other paranormal applications will have in the future is difficult to determine at this time. Whoever makes the first major breakthrough in this field will have a quantum lead over his opponent and an advantage similar to sole possession of nuclear weapons. The intent here is to emphasize the need for more coordinated research in the realm of the paranormal. Additionally, there is a need to provide leaders at all levels with a basic understanding of weapon systems they may encounter in the not-too-distant future. In a video that I've done previously, I put up a link where Dr. Giordano was doing this exact same conversation at West Point, talking to the new recruits and going over the new weapons of the modern day warfare, which is the battlefield of the mind. So this is an ongoing conversation for decades that we can follow. World War III is going on, folks. A response came almost immediately in January 1981. Columnist Jack Anderson of the Washington Post was quick to demonstrate American skepticism of psychic research in an article entitled "Pentagon Invades Buck Rogers' Turf." Anderson's one-sided derogatory prose was filled with terms like futuristic fantasies, hogwash, and voodoo warfare. A month later, Anderson was back reinforcing psychic skepticism. This time he began, "The brass hats are indeed dabbling in the dark arts." Other carefully chosen phrases included evil eye, comic strip, Ouija board warriors, and voodoo warriors arsenal. Within weeks, he returned to the subject by referring to wacky projects of the CIA or studies like a Haitian witch doctor might try. Maclean's magazine reported in 1981 that President Reagan and Defense Secretary Weinberger had to decide whether to continue funding the top secret project, which, according to Jack Anderson of the Washington Post, is currently allotted $6 million annually. Between 1981 and 1984, numerous articles appeared in periodicals revealing an astonishing amount of research in the psychic field and reflecting great skepticism amongst the scientific community. In January 1984, columnist George Herbert wrote an article entitled, "But a Peek at ESP is justified in a Norfolk, Virginia newspaper. He focused attention on U.S. Defense Department denials that the government was supporting psychic research. He suggested and hoped the denials were based on security concerns. Even as a skeptic, he noted, if, on the other hand, the denial reflects a true military disinterest in the psychic possibilities, our own and the Soviet Union's, that would be reason for worry. An NBC Nightline program in February 1984 discussed the possibility of mind wars. Researchers, scientists, and government consultants were interviewed. Especially noteworthy was the general skepticism of government advisors compared with the positive convictions of researchers. And most recently, in the 11th May 1987 issue of Newsweek, Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chairman Claire Bourne Bell invited psychic Uri Geller for a reception and dinner in Geneva during Soviet arms negotiations. He had previously arranged for Geller to give a briefing on Capitol Hill in a special bug-proof room. Most of the spectators were Hill and Pentagon aides. House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Dante Fischel came away impressed. Was Lieutenant Colonel Alexander's message taken seriously? Is the Defense Department conducting more coordinated parapsychology research? Do leaders at all levels have a basic understanding of these psychic weapons systems we may soon encounter? What is the potential threat to the electronic components which form the basic foundation of all our sophisticated weapons systems? In light of future Defense Department funding limitations, does parapsychology, the mind frontier, really offer a new battlefield dimension which warrants continued military exploration? This paper attempts to answer these questions by providing an unclassified status update on Lieutenant Colonel Alexander's 1980 concerns. It is not a research report to identify everything the government is doing. By researching events in literature in the 1980s, particularly those involving military personnel and government programs, this paper shows that too much is happening in the parapsychology field to ignore, and too little information is disseminated to know how to treat it properly. Defining parapsychology. Paranormal phenomena are observable facts or events which are not scientifically explainable at this time. Psychic research includes such phenomena as telepathy, mind-to-mind communication, precognition, knowledge of future events, dowsing, clairvoyant ability to find water, minerals, and so on, by means beyond known sensory or perceptual faculties, remote viewing or out-of-body experiences, seeing locations, objects, or events shielded from ordinary perception in a spatial location separate from one's physical body, and psychokinesis, movement of matter by mental means without use any known physical force. These types of psychic functioning are also referred to as psi, which is frequently preferred by researchers to dispel the misconception that these capabilities are outside the realm of normal human experience. Researchers contend psychic functioning occurs naturally in the everyday experiences of many people. That's what I've been saying. Psi is further subdivided into two categories. The term extrasensory perception refers to telepathy, dowsing, precognition, and remote viewing, while the term PK refers to psychokinesis. Psychotronics is the term used to describe the amplification of psychic energies by electronic devices. The first recorded experiment of psi involved the military intelligence application of remote viewing. Back in 550 BC, King Croesus of Lydia felt threatened by the increasing power of the Persians. He needed to know what they were planning. Historians give us a detailed account of just what happened. Croesus sought an oracle who could somehow perceive his enemy's plans, an oracle with proven psychic abilities, so he devised a simple test. He dispatched messengers throughout the ancient world to visit different oracles and ask for a written description of Croesus's activities at a specified time and day. The oracle at Delphi responded, "I can count the sands and I can measure the ocean. I have ears for the silent and know what the dumb man nameth. Lo, on my sense there striketh the smell of a shell-covered tortoise, boiling now on a fire with the flesh of a lamb in a cauldron. Brass is the vessel below, and brass is the cover above it." Only the Delphi oracle provided the correct response. For on the specified day, Croesus did something he thought most impossible for anyone to conceive of his doing. He took a tortoise and a lamb, and cutting them in pieces with his own hands, boiled them both together in a brazen cauldron, covered over with a lid that was also brass. Croesus's 550 BC experiment convinced him remote viewing worked for the Delphi Oracle and provided him a significant intelligence force multiplier against his Persian enemies. How far have we advanced since then? Discovering the mind's great treasures. In over 2,500 years since Croesus' first psi experiment, it is amazing that people still know so little about this subject. Paranormal experiences occur daily throughout the world. They are nothing new, nor are they limited to particular types of individuals. Our mind contains boundless capabilities, just waiting to be recognized, used, and understood. We all accept and share at least some common understanding of this vast mental potential. We have all heard statements such as, think positive. Sayings such as this are based on our acceptance of the notion that our mental aptitude can directly affect the outcome of events. Opinions vary, however, on just how great an impact mental attitude can have and under what circumstances it can have such an impact. When we look around us, we can all recall personal experiences or those of others who have experienced some type of paranormal event. I know I have. These events demonstrate the reality of the untapped potential of the human mind. The truth is that most people are interested in psychic experiences because they are having them. The mind frontier is rich with resources beyond our imaginations. Many adventurous and courageous people have already penetrated portions of this region and are using their newly developed talents. A scientific understanding of how these gifts work continues to elude us. Soviet researchers and a few Western researchers think innate signals are transmitted via some type of radio wave, perhaps extremely low frequencies, ELF. U.S. physicist Russell Targ invented the ultra-high power carbon dioxide laser and is a specialist in microwave and plasma research. He also conducted psychic research at the Stanford Research Institute for years and is known as one of the prominent experts of psychic research. Russell Targ. Jack Anderson's 1981 columns on voodoo warfare clearly demonstrated a cynical attitude by labeling such research as crazy. But in response to his columns, letters poured in from the general populace supporting the research. Through greater public awareness, by 1984, even Jack Anderson was changing his tune. He stated, but there are legitimate laboratory projects that may eventually unlock the mysteries of the human mind. One of the most promising is the testing of remote viewing, the claimed ability of some psychics to describe scenes thousands of miles away. Much of the skepticism and cynicism is generated from within the scientific community itself. In Ronald McRae's 1984 book, Mind Wars, the author describes several examples of the scientific community's inability to deal with the unknown and how, in our society, the prevailing concept defines what research is acceptable and what isn't, which laboratories will enjoy the patronage of the Pope in Galileo's time or the government today, who is published and who isn't. I've seen this myself, folks. I've been to science facilities. I know the difference between the work that they're working on and the work that they're talking to you about. Of course, not all scientists are skeptics constrained by prevailing concepts. Captain Edgar D. Mitchell, an astronaut on the Apollo 14 space flight to the moon, holds a Doctor of Science degree in astronautics from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He conducted ESP tests on that space mission in February 1971. In the early 1980s, during an interview with Martin Ebon, author of Psychic Warfare, Threat or Illusion, Captain Mitchell commented, "During the intervening years, my work, as well as the work of parapsychology in general, has convinced me that the human organism is capable of all of the events we study in parapsychology. I have established this to my own satisfaction, if not fully, to the satisfaction of all skeptics." Within the exploding technical revolution, the eminent computer scientist A.M. Turing considers the question that the only discernible difference between a human being and a computer may be that the latter cannot experience psi. Similarly, pioneer computer researcher Dr. Jacques Vallée stated, "My contention is that machines will be able to think by any human standard that can be precisely defined. But as the machines get smarter by these rational standards, It is the definition of humanness that will change. I think we will discover, beyond these rational standards, that the human race has many other psychic talents we had previously been afraid to recognize. Talents which constitute our truly genuine existence as humans. They are the only part of us worth talking about. Soviet threat. This is what always gets the money out of the checking accounts for every project. Soviet threat. With these tremendous expended mental capabilities comes an equally awesome threat to both self and country, one which stretches the imagination far beyond its normal boundaries. Martin Ebon cites a U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency report entitled Controlled Offensive Behavior, USSR, which was declassified 8 years ahead of schedule. The report states, the Soviet Union is well aware of the benefits and applications of parapsychology research. Many scientists, US and Soviet, feel that parapsychology can be harnessed to create conditions where one can alter or manipulate the minds of others. The major impetus behind the Soviet drive to harness the possible capabilities of telepathic communication, telekinetics, and bionics are said to come from Soviet military and the KGB. Ebon uses extensive research to provide an in-depth account of parapsychology research in both the Soviet Union and the United States. In noting the dramatic increase in KGB security and control of Soviet parapsychology research, he concludes that psychic warfare is something to fear. After returning from a visit to the Soviet Union as a guest of the USSR Academy of Sciences in September 1983, Russell Targ wrote, many Soviet laboratories appear to be conducting experiments in which their main goal is the modification of the behavior and feelings of remote humans and animals by psychic means. In summarizing his travels from Moscow to Leningrad to Yerevan and his discussions with Soviet researchers, he notes, they universally expressed the feeling that psi's importance lies in the development of human potential, not in its possible military or intelligence application. In 1978, Henry Griss and William Dick in the New Soviet Psychic Discoveries provided a wealth of first-hand data on Soviet breakthroughs in parapsychology and related fields. From this information, they presented an eye-opening, inescapable conclusion that the Kremlin was ready to adopt psychic knowledge for military use. They also reported on tests conducted by the CIA in 1973 involving two noted U.S. psychics. In controlled tests, the psychics projected their minds over long distances, apparently accurately describing super-secret military installations and even the contents of confidential files in these bases. During one experiment, Pat Price, described in minute detail a Soviet installation hidden in the Ural Mountains. CIA agents in Russia confirmed his description. The two psychics spied on China, and once again, ground truth agents, CIA contacts in the People's Republic, were able to confirm their accuracy. Retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Thomas E. Bearden has a Master of Science degree in nuclear engineering with over 29 years' experience in air defense systems, tactics, and operations, technical military intelligence, nuclear weapons employment, anti-radiation missile countermeasures, tube artillery, and air defense missile systems. He also directed the production of U.S. Army technical intelligence on Soviet surface-to-air missile systems. In his 1980 book, Excalibur Briefing, he describes psychotronic weapons in detail, along with a mind-boggling hypothesis. He believes, quote, that by psychotronics, the minds of all men can be linked into a great supermind having absolute psychokinetic mastery over time and space, end quote. The basis for his sense of urgency lies in a non-conventional interpretation of two statements. Like Griss and Dick, he points to a statement made by Soviet Premier Leonid Brezhnev on 13 June 1973. He urged the United States to agree to a ban on research and development of new kinds of weapons more terrifying than existing nuclear weapons. The reason and conscience of humanity dictate the necessity of erecting an insurmountable barrier to the development of such weapons. Bearden also cites a comment made in the 1970s by former Air Force Chief of Intelligence Major General George J. Keegan. The Soviets are working on weapons 20 years ahead of anything ever conceived in the U.S. So awesome as to lead the Soviets to believe that in the coming decade they would be capable of total neutralization of our ballistic and submarine missiles. Bearden feels these terrifying weapons are psychotronic or paraphysical in nature. In 1986, he wrote a book entitled Fer de Lance, a briefing on Soviet scalar electromagnetic weapons. He named the book after the deadly South American pit viper snake, which unexpectedly strikes its prey with great agility and lethal effects. In this book, he indicts the orthodox Western scientific community for its bureaucratic smugness and arrogance. He compares the current Soviet secret development of psychotronic weapons with the U.S. secret development of the atomic bomb. We have assumed that it certainly could never happen to us, and that the secret weapons scenario will never be repeated. On the contrary, it has happened again. Someone else has done it, and it has happened to us. The equivalent of about 7 Manhattan projects has been poured into Fer de Lance by the Soviets, and the program has been successful almost beyond imagination. The eerie weapons are now developed, deployed, and tested. The ambush has been completed. Fer de Lance is coiled and ready to strike. Folks, this is the nature of the beast. This is what's been going on. Bearden's book provides a detailed theory with supporting evidence which he and others who share his convictions have been compiling for years. He has ventured beyond the prevailing concepts of our scientific community to find answers to real paranormal events which have been occurring around the globe. His evidence specifies dates, times, and places where these weapons have been tested and how they were detected. His theory of scalar electromagnetic waves, electrogravitation, and Jules Verne type weapons is overwhelming, as well as the ramifications. He notes that, quote, the results of psychotronic research extend into every field of military application, end quote. Almost every weapons system we presently have or are developing is totally vulnerable to scalar EM weaponry. This includes personnel, electronics, including fusing and warhead, explosives, propellants, fuels, ordnance, ships, submarines, torpedoes, aircraft, helicopters, missiles, drones, rockets, tanks, armored vehicles, weapon carriers, self-propelled and towed artillery, communications, satellites, radars, command and control, directed energy weapons systems. Oh, I didn't know they existed, but they're listed here. Surveillance and sensor systems, mines, artillery rounds, and ammunition, nuclear warheads, etc. Whether the Soviets have developed all of these weapons is not the crucial point. What is apparent, however, is the tremendous potential threat of psychotronics as an instrument of power. The crucial point, therefore, is that the Soviets apparently are aggressively pursuing research to control this instrument. In 1977, Soviet parapsychology research finally became an issue the Carter administration could not ignore. No matter how skeptical some officials remained, on June 11, the KGB arrested Los Angeles Times reporter Robert C. Toth in Moscow and charged him with obtaining a secret state document, which revealed the existence of ongoing research in parapsychology at several laboratories in the Soviet Union. Soviets admitted for the first time current official Soviet interest in the military potential parapsychology. This incident focused presidential attention on a science which some of his advisors claimed did not even exist. Carter ordered a new definitive intelligence estimate of Soviet psychic research and its military potential, using all the intelligence resources available to the CIA, the first such report ever done at the pinnacle of the U.S. national security establishment. The report was completed in 1978, but only partially released under the Freedom of Information Act in 1980. Rather ambiguously, they found no evidence of a massive Soviet psycho warfare, nor did the CIA dismiss entirely the most apocalyptic allegations of secret Soviet psi research. The evidence is fragmentary and contradictory at best. A June 1983 Congressional Research Service report to Congress says, it is also speculated that the Soviet government is firmly committed to the funding of psi research and that much of this funding, variously speculated to amount to tens of millions of dollars, is directed toward military research. Yowzers. There's so many documents like this, folks, that are out there, and I'm happy this was sent to me. The prevailing concepts and negative peer pressure within the scientific community is best shown by the 1984 award of a $750,000 endowment for parapsychology research to the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. Leading British universities, including Oxford and Cambridge, decided not to apply for the endowment, primarily on the grounds that it would throw doubt on the credibility of other research programs. Obviously, this is an example of the suspicion Dr. Beaumont was talking about. It is an indication that major self-imposed obstacles continue to impede psychic research. The first great battle of any mind race must be fought within ourselves. If each of us becomes more aware and open-minded to the reality of paranormal phenomena, we can learn to use these treasures rather than fear them. They are treasures. This greater psychic awareness has perhaps already begun. I think it's happening now, solidly. The general public accepts the concept of psi, often based on personal experience. But given such great controversy within the scientific community, what should be the military attitude? What are the potential military uses and how feasible are they? 13 of the 14 best-known parapsychology laboratories in the United States responded to a questionnaire in 1979, giving us part of the answer. 4 considered espionage possible, 5 likely, and the remaining 4 certain. Similar proportions of the researchers believed psychic powers might be used to psychically harm, sicken, or kill individuals, or to interfere with the operation of physical equipment such as computers. Ronald McCrae, an investigative reporter for Jack Anderson, spent over a year sifting through a sea of conjectures, rumors, and confusion, studying conflicting reports, competing interest groups, and conjectures of psychic researchers to compile the most accurate record of facts he could find. His 1984 book, Mind Wars: The True Story of Government Research into the military potential of psychic weapons, provides startling insights into numerous government projects involving psychic functioning. So much so that Professor Marcello Truzzi, director of the Center for Scientific Anomalies Research in Ann Arbor, Michigan, said, "He has given us enough pieces of the puzzle so that we can now at least see some of the areas filled in enough to make a preliminary assessment and recognize that government psi efforts have been grossly publicly underestimated." Similarly, Russell Targ and Keith Harry authored a 1985 national bestseller entitled Mind Race, where they discussed the unclassified portions of over 10 years of government-sponsored psi research at Stanford Research Institute. They note, in laboratories across this country and in many other nations as well, 46 experimental series have investigated remote viewing. 23 of these investigations have reported successful results and produced statistically significant data, where 3 would be expected. Psi research is definitely alive in the United States and internationally. In 1983, the 5th International Conference on Psychotronic Research was held in Bratislava, Czechoslovakia. The founder and president of the 15-year-old International Association for Psychotronic Research, IAPR, was Dr. Zdeněk Redjek from Czechoslovakia. Russell Targ points out that several speakers at this conference expressed a clear desire for openness and cooperation rather than for developing military uses of psi. Targ agrees, but I contend that government and the military have a responsibility to determine what kinds of military uses/threats might exist. Potential military uses. It should not be hard for anyone to envision potential military uses of the powerful psi capabilities discussed thus far. Telepathy, precognition, dowsing, remote viewing, and psychokinesis offer an endless list of possibilities. In 1984, Charles Honorton, director of the Psychophysical Research Laboratories in Princeton, said, "There's potential for military and other uses, but psi has not reached the application stage." Let's look at some specific military uses before addressing the implementation issue. Intelligence. Just like Croesus in 550 BC, remote viewing and precognition can break through barriers of time and space to perhaps eliminate the word secrecy from our vocabulary. This is an important part. 1976, CIA Director George Bush enthusiastically gave retired astronaut Edgar Mitchell, quote, permission to organize high-level seminars at the CIA to discuss possible intelligence applications of parapsychology. Although interest waned in 1977 when Admiral Stansfield Turner replaced Bush, it shows there are others who see definite psi applications for the intelligence community. As mentioned earlier, 4 of the best-known U.S. parapsychology laboratories are certain that psi can be used for espionage. These 4 labs must have known about Project Scanate. In a previous section of this paper, I quoted Henry Grist and William Dick's 1978 book, where 2 U.S. psychics described super-secret military installations and even the contents of confidential files at the installation. Ronald McRae's 1984 book gives more details on this actual test. Psychics versus the CIA, extrasensory perception against the most sophisticated codes known to the U.S. National Security Agency, remote viewing against satellite photography, and top U.S. agents behind the Iron Curtain. The whole of the U.S. national security apparatus cooperating to make cheating impossible. The test was dubbed Project Scanate, an impossible test with impossible results. Pudov, Targ, and the psychics won. The following example demonstrates some results. On impulse, Pudov gave Price the coordinates for the latest series of targets selected by the CIA, including an area in Virginia approximately 135 miles southwest of Washington, D.C. 3 days later, he got Price's 5-page written response in the mail, beginning with a description of the area from an altitude of 1,500 feet and ending with a tour through building interiors. The tour was complete with description of equipment, names from desks, and just to show he was serious, a list of a dozen labelings on file folders locked in a file cabinet. 3 weeks later, the CIA informed him, Pudov, that Price was right. Exactly right. The other psychic, Swan, although sometimes ambiguous or off the mark, also was remarkable when he described a previously unknown Soviet installation sketching buildings and rail lines and noting an unusually high proportion of women among the personnel. A U.S. spy satellite verified Swan's report 3 months later. Another example involved Navy Captain Joseph L. Dick, the leader of the Defense Intelligence Agency office responsible for gathering evidence on potentially live MIAs. He used psychics and said, some of their leads have checked out. They've been able to visualize aircraft crashes, and we've found the wreckage where they indicated. Remote viewing is obviously a capability well suited to the intelligence business and unobstructed by distance limitations. Remote viewing showed that the planet Jupiter had faint rings, like those of its neighbor Saturn. Astronomers scoffed at this claim. Carl Sagan called it, quote, ridiculous. 9 years later, Voyager 1 sent back pictures of the Jovian rings. I found this part very funny when I first went through it, because I know a lot of people love Carl Sagan and they quote science and science this, and I'm butchering his phrase, but with great what do they say? With great beliefs come great proofs, or something like that with Sagan. And this remote viewing kind of just proved him wrong, because he didn't believe the simple information that was presented to him, and it turned out it was true. The person did not have a great proof, but they were right. So it's just an interesting thing I noticed in reading. In addition to remote viewing, map dowsing could be used to pinpoint the locations of Soviet submarines or find underground tunnels in the Korean demilitarized zone. Personnel. Before discussing potential personnel applications of psi, let me remind you that at least 4 of the U.S. best-known parapsychology research laboratories are certain, quote, psychic paras might be used to physically harm, sicken, or kill individuals, end quote. Their confidence is probably based on experiments like that done in 1975 at San Francisco Medical Research Institute with psychic healer Dean Kraft. He was to try psychically to lower the blood pressure and heart rate of a laboratory rat in a plexiglass cage. The observers, however, had an opportunity to watch for 20 minutes and record the steady decrease of the rat's heart rate, all the way to 0. He mentally killed the rat without any contact. Similarly, Nina Kulagina of the Soviet Union is known for her psychokinetic abilities. After just 40 seconds of focusing her mental influences, she, was able to completely stop an isolated frog heart from a distance of about 1.5 meters. Quote, when we, Soviet professor Gennady Sergeyev, examined it, we found that it was torn apart as if bombarded by lightning bolts of microscopic size. The energy flow can reach incredible intensity. Lightning balls, like Jedi stuff. From these examples, we see the lethality of this type of psi. Soviet interest in these capabilities is nothing new. Targ notes experiments that feature induced pain or behavioral manipulation at a distance have been the distinguishing characteristics of almost all official Soviet psi research since the early 1920s. From the mid-60s until the mid-70s, the KGB beamed mysterious microwave radiation at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. This bombardment did not exceed U.S. health standards, but did exceed much more rigid Soviet standards. Why are Soviet standards more rigid than ours? And why were they putting U.S. Embassy personnel at greater risk than they would allow their own personnel for no apparent reason? Communications. Just think of the possibilities telepathy provides in the area of communications. Direct mind-to-mind link-ups could eliminate security problems and provide direct access anywhere without equipment dependencies. Soviet researcher Paul Nomov described an experiment where a mother rabbit was placed in a laboratory with electrodes implanted in her brain to monitor activity. Her baby rabbits were taken aboard a submarine, which then submerged deep in the ocean. At synchronized times, the baby rabbits were killed, and at each precise moment, the mother rabbit's brain reacted. The innate form of communication which traversed great distance in ocean depths may be the source of many natural instincts. When asked in an interview about the limits to man's extended mental awareness, Targ responded, one of the conclusions of our decade of research at SRI is that we found no bounds for psychic functioning. As physicists, we always try and look for the limits of phenomena. But what we found is that electromagnetic shielding does not interfere with psychic functioning. We even went to the extent of having remote viewing experiments conducted with the viewer submerged in a submarine under 500 feet of seawater. That greatly alters even the lowest frequency of electromagnetic waves. But we found the viewers perfectly able to do remote viewing from the submarine, just as they had done on dry land. We also found that they were to look across distances up to thousands of miles. So from our experiments, we found that neither distance nor electromagnetic shielding interfered with psychic functioning. Bearden goes even further. He postulates that through the use of psychotronic electromagnetic scalar weapons, all forms of electronic communications are vulnerable. I agree. He supports an emerging theory of local general relativity, which does not assume that local spacetime is always flat, but rather allows the individual conservation laws to be violated locally. I think Tesla agreed with that too. The major implication of this startling new engineering physics is that one can engineer physical reality itself. Communication faster than light speed is possible. Yep, a lot of things faster than light speed are possible, and folks are going to learn that. Electronic equipment. Many researchers are concentrating on tests of lower psychokinesis called micro-PK. Typically, the psychic subject tries to influence a simple mechanical or electrical system, such as a sensitive thermometer or computer microchip, which can be affected by a very low level of energy. Robert Jan, Dean of the School of Engineering and Applied Science at Princeton University, says such tests have shown consistently positive results. If a microchip and other electronic equipment can be mentally manipulated, the new high-tech information revolution has just been handed a deadly setback. Financial institutions, businesses, governments, and those dependent on computers are suddenly very vulnerable. This apparent capability has created a paranoia amongst talented psychics in the parapsychology field, perhaps with some justification. Researcher Jeffrey Mishlove believes that anyone with the ability to jam computers would probably have to be destroyed. How big of a step is it from being able to mentally stop an elevator at will to manipulating the computer or electronics of a weapons system? Weapons. Through psychotronics, Bearden says almost every weapons system we presently have or are developing is vulnerable to scalar EM weaponry. Once again, we see existing weapons and technology possibly falling prey to a new weapons generation called psychotronics. He developed this weapons list in 1980. The following list enumerates all the probable Soviet psychotronic weapons that I am aware of. 1. Electromagnetic field canceller. 2. Electron current canceller. 3. Death radiator de-inceptor. 4. Free energy generator. 5. Psychotronic bomb. 6. Brain link. 7. Brain probe. 8. Disease radiator ray. 9. Emotion radiator ray. 10. Anti-submarine systems. 11. Teleporters prototype. 12. Force generators. 13. Ortho frame generators. 14. Quark/anti-quark rays. 15. Distant telepathy. 16. Nuclear radiation inhibitors. 17. Mental implantation. 18. Anti-ballistic missile submarines mid-course and terminal. 19. Materializer shields. 20. Sweeps for nuclear debris. 21. AAA systems. 22. Anti-satellite systems. 23. Tesla effect weapons. 24. Earthquake generators. 25. Anti-vehicle systems. 26. Weather control systems. He and others have continued monitoring and documenting instances where they believe these weapons have been tested, theorizing the possible effects and matching them up with real-world paranormal events. Typical incidents he describes include a Tesla weapon at Sershagin, scalar potential interferometer, nuclear flashes off the coast of Africa, the 15 April 1979 Yugoslavian earthquake, a Tesla shield sighted in August 1980, a continuous Tesla fireball in Lithuania on 10 September 1976, a continuous Tesla EMP globe in Iran, East Coast aerial blasts, high burst registration in 1977 and 1978, booms in Delaware in 1982, and laser blinding of U.S. satellites in 1975. More recent incidents include abnormalities during Titan launches, shuttle launches, and even associated weather anomalies. Think, the ability to manipulate the weather would allow you to literally control the fog of war, but Bearden's 1986 apocalyptic message foretells of an ultimate destructive power. There is a special time bomb ticking away for all of humanity. For the first time, the total destruction of our entire biosphere and perhaps our entire solar system is only moments away from the finger on the trigger. Just how feasible are these potential military uses of psi? Feasibility of operational employment. The experiments of the 1970s should more than convince you of psi's potential military uses. After using many untrained individuals in remote viewing experiments, Targ concludes, the best scientific research suggests that the capacity for developing genuine psychic abilities lies latent in many, or perhaps most, people. In 1984, the U.S. Army initiated a 2-year study to evaluate the potential of certain unconventional methods to enhance human performance. That study recently concluded. Sleep learning, mental imaging, and accelerated learning programs are among the unconventional techniques which may improve soldier performance. However, the committee rejected parapsychological techniques such as extrasensory perception and psychokinesis as scientifically unsupportable. Note this study rejects psi because it is not scientifically supportable, but does it work? Many researchers point to how the scientific community was the last to accept hypnotism, so two researchers feel psi will gain acceptance from society long before the scientific community comes to grips with it. Operational use of psi is up to the user. King Croesus was content after one test to use the Delphi Oracle. World-famous psyker Edgar I. Casey advised General John Pershing and accompanied him on European missions. If you haven't studied Edgar Casey, you totally should. Congressman Charlie Rose is a respected long-term congressman and member of the House Select Committee on Intelligence. He takes psychic weapons seriously, but in 1984 didn't think we had the technology to build them. The congressman's personal experience has convinced him such breakthroughs are on the horizon. He has attended classified demonstrations on remote viewing arranged by the CIA. Says Rose, quote, I've seen some incredible examples of remote viewing, so much so that I think we ought to pay close attention to developments in this field and especially to what the Soviets are doing. If they develop a capacity to have people mentally view secret centers within this country, we could come to the point where we didn't have any secrets. Bearden thinks those breakthroughs have occurred. I agree. He has documented evidence that the Soviets are beyond the speculation and research stages and have deployed psi weapons systems ready to strike. With the threat so near, why are we so unprepared? This mindset is best described by one eminent physicist who read SRI's report on years of remote viewing research. Quote, "This is something I won't believe even if it turns out to be true." Even author Ronald McCrae, after his investigation into government psi research, is plagued with the Western culture mindset. Personally, I cannot accept the reality of remote viewing. Bearden says even when Western scientists are confronted with the actual Soviet tests of these psychotronic weapons directly over their heads, they do not recognize the weaponry nor the nature of the effects produced. Remember that, folks. It could be right over your head and you won't even know. Totally new type of warfare. Totally new type of warfare. And with that, folks, we are done with this document. Thank you very much for sharing this with me, the Nutball News. I think it provides a lot of insight for folks to see that this conversation has been going on for a very long time. These skills, these energies, these other battlefields of the mind, this other aspect of World War III. This is not new stuff, folks.